The day they told me I was being replaced, I was still wearing my wedding ring. That detail matters because it explains why I didn't scream. I was standing in the conference room of Caldwell and Price Interiors, staring at a glass wall that reflected a woman I barely recognized. 58 years old. Gray threaded through my hair like frost on branches, sensible heels, hands folded too politely in front of my stomach, as if I were waiting to be excused from my own life. Across the table sat my daughter Elise. Not as my daughter, as my boss. "We think it's time to refresh the brand," she said, fingers steepled, voice smooth with rehearsed sympathy. New energy, new leadership. Beside her, my son-in-law Marcus nodded as if this were a weather update. I had founded that company 32 years earlier at my kitchen table in Evanston, Illinois, with nothing but a borrowed sewing machine and a notebook full of ideas. I named it after my maiden name and my late husband's, Caldwell and Price. A marriage stitched into wood and fabric and sweat. I had stepped back 5 years ago, handing Elise the title of CEO because she was pregnant and needed stability, or so she said. I stayed on as creative director, unpaid by choice, because I believed family was an extension of legacy. That was my first mistake. The second came when Marcus slid a folder across the table. Inside was a severance agreement. Not for him, for me. Consulting role ends at the end of the quarter. Elise continued, eyes never meeting mine. We'll host a retirement dinner, something tasteful. Retirement. I hadn't even slowed down. I looked at the folder, then at my daughter's face. The same face I had once wiped mashed sweet potatoes from on Thanksgiving morning. The same eyes that used to search for me in a crowd. "When did you decide this?" I asked. Marcus answered instead. The board agreed unanimously. There was no board. There had never been. Just the three of us. And the papers I signed years ago, trusting blood more than ink. I felt something tear, not loudly but deeply, like fabric giving way under pressure. I thought of the Christmas party the year before, when Elise had introduced me as my mom who used to run the place. Used to. Past tense slipped in like a knife. I didn't argue, I didn't cry. I nodded. That scared them. I gathered my notebook, the one with my sketches, my handwriting, my ideas that had built their lives. As I stood, Elise finally looked up. "You'll still be family," she said quickly. "This doesn't change that." I smiled. Family was exactly what they were taking from me. That night, I drove home to the lake house in Wilmette. The one my husband Thomas and I had bought before Caldwell and Price ever made a profit. The one Elise had recently suggested we downsize from. I poured a glass of wine and sat in the dark. For the first time since Thomas died, I took off my ring. Not because I stopped loving him, because I was about to fight and I needed both hands free. At 3 in the morning, my phone buzzed. A message from Elise. "Mom, I hope you understand this isn't personal. It's just business." That was when the open loop formed in my mind, sharp and clear. If this was business, then I would stop behaving like family. And I would remember something they had forgotten. Everything they owned existed because of me, including the truth. The first thing I did was nothing. That sounds passive, but it was the most active decision I'd made in years. I didn't call Elise. I didn't confront Marcus. I didn't tell anyone at the company I was being pushed out. I showed up every morning as usual, walked through the design floor, complimented fabrics, adjusted lighting, listened. People talk freely when they think you're already gone. That was how I learned about the affair. Not the romantic kind, the corporate one. Caldwell and Price had quietly signed a manufacturing exclusivity deal with a shell company in Indiana. On paper, it was efficient. In reality, it was owned by Marcus's brother. No disclosure, no board approval, no competitive bidding. I sat at my desk, heart steady, and wrote the name down. Then I learned about the loan. Elise had leveraged the company's intellectual property as collateral for a private expansion loan. My designs, my archives, my registered patterns, all without my consent. That one surprised me, because it meant they believed I was harmless. At home, my granddaughter Lily asked why I seemed quieter. "You're not drawing as much," she said, peering at my notebook. I smiled at her and said nothing. Children sense when something sacred is shifting. Thanksgiving came early that year, because Marcus's parents were flying in. Elise insisted we host at my house. "Tradition matters," she said. So I cooked roasted turkey, cranberry relish from Thomas's recipe, sweet potato casserole with pecans toasted just right. They set the table, and they seated me at the far end. Not at the head. Marcus raised a glass. "To growth," he said. Elise added, "to the future." No one mentioned my name. I looked down the table and realized something else. They had already replaced me in their minds. which meant I was free. The following Monday, I met with a lawyer, not the family attorney, not a friend. A woman named Ruth Hanley who specialized in corporate reversals and inheritance disputes. She read my documents slowly. Then she looked up. "They don't know what they're sitting on," she said. I smiled for the first time in weeks. "What do you mean?" "You never transferred majority ownership," she said. "You transferred operational control. That's not the same thing." The air felt thinner, sharper. Ruth continued, "You also never signed away moral rights to your designs, which means their loan is built on sand." I drove home shaking, not from fear, from clarity. That night, Elise called. "Mom, Marcus is worried you're being distant." I held the phone gently. "I'm just adjusting," I said. "Change takes time." She exhaled, relieved. "Good," she said. "We're all adults here." Yes, we were. And adults understand consequences. I opened my old filing cabinet that night, the one Elise had suggested throwing out years ago. Inside were contracts, letters, early emails printed and saved. Thomas had taught me to keep everything. "Memory is leverage," he used to say. I laid the papers out on the dining table, the same one where they had quietly erased me, and I began to plan. Not revenge fueled by anger. Revenge built on patience, law, and the slow return of truth. Because if they wanted to exclude me from my own legacy, I would show them exactly how much of it still belonged to me, and I would do it without raising my voice. The first official crack appeared on a Tuesday morning disguised as praise. Elise stopped by my desk with coffee from the cafe downstairs. She placed it gently beside my notebook, the way she used to when she was a teenager, asking for permission instead of forgiveness. "Everyone's been saying how calm you've been," she said. "It's mature." Mature, another word that meant obsolete when spoken the wrong way. I thanked her, took a sip, and said nothing. What she didn't know was that the calm she sensed wasn't acceptance. It was distance. Emotional distance sharpens observation. And I had begun to see patterns I once ignored out of maternal generosity. That afternoon, I stayed late pretending to reorganize fabric samples. When the office emptied, I accessed the design archive server. My login still worked. They hadn't thought to revoke it yet. Another small mercy born of underestimation. I downloaded records, not everything, just enough. Timestamps showing my authorship on core designs, still generating 70% of company revenue. Emails approving pattern adaptations without licensing. Internal memos referencing legacy assets without attribution. They spoke about my life's work as if it were furniture left behind after a move. At home, Lily asked if she could stay with me longer that night. "Mom and Dad are busy," she said softly. I didn't ask with what. I cooked her grilled cheese cut into triangles like I used to for Elise. As Lily ate, she asked, "Are you going to leave the company?" The question landed heavier than any boardroom betrayal. "No," I said carefully, "but things are changing." She nodded satisfied and went back to her book. Children adapt quickly when adults fail to notice. The following week, Marcus announced a holiday expansion initiative during a staff meeting. New hires, new manufacturing line, public announcement scheduled for the end of the month. Everyone clapped. I watched Elise's face. She looked proud, nervous, like someone standing on a floor they believed was solid. That night I called Ruth. "They're about to announce," I said. "Good," she replied. "That gives us leverage." We met 2 days later in her office walls lined with case files instead of family photos. "You need to decide how far you want to go," Ruth said. "You can shut them down quietly, or you can let them expose themselves first." I thought of Thanksgiving, of being seated away from the head of my own table. "Let them announce," I said. Ruth smiled. "Then we move." On the morning of the announcement, Elise wore a cream blazer I once designed. Marcus gave interviews using phrases I'd coined decades earlier. "Innovation rooted in tradition," he said. I stood in the back of the room, invisible by design. The press release went live at noon. At 12:15, Ruth filed an injunction. By 3 o'clock, Caldwell and Price's expansion loan was frozen. By 4, Elise was calling me repeatedly. I didn't answer. I went home, brewed tea, and sat by the window watching the lake darken under winter clouds. When my phone finally rang again, it was a different number. "This is Mr. Holloway from First Meridian Bank," the voice said. "We need to clarify your position regarding certain assets." "My position," I said evenly, "is that they are mine." Silence. "Then we'll be in touch." That night, Elise came to the house. She stood in the doorway, eyes rimmed, red voice tight. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. I looked at her and felt something close to grief. "You didn't ask," I said. The house felt smaller once the truth entered it. Elise sat at the kitchen table where she once did homework while I sketched blueprints late into the night. Marcus paced behind her restless hands, flexing as if he could squeeze the situation back into control. "This is blowing out of proportion," he said. "We just need you to sign a clarification." Clarification, another word that meant surrender. I poured myself coffee with the silver kettle Thomas loved, took my time, then sat across from them. "You used my designs as collateral," I said. "You rerouted production to your brother's company. You announced expansion without legal clearance." Marcus opened his mouth. Elise raised a hand. "Why?" she asked me quietly. "Why now?" The question surprised me. "Because you stopped seeing me," I said. "And once I realized that I stopped protecting you from consequences." Tears slid down her face. She wiped them quickly, embarrassed. "We thought you were ready to step aside," she said. "You always said legacy mattered more than ego." "It does," I replied. "That's why I'm here." Marcus scoffed. "This is retaliation." "No," I said. "This is correction." The silence stretched. Finally, Elise whispered, "What do you want?" The answer had been forming for months. "I want my seat back," I said. "Not the title, the truth." They exchanged glances. Ruth arrived the next morning. Professional, calm, unimpressed. She laid out options like chess moves. Option 1. Restructure ownership. Reinstate my authority over creative assets. Public acknowledgement of authorship. Option 2. Litigation. Public, prolonged, unforgiving. Marcus bristled. Elise shrank. "This will destroy the company," Marcus said. No, Ruth corrected him. "Your decisions already did that. We're discussing how much of it survives." By Christmas, the company issued a revised statement. Caldwell and Price would return to founder-guided principles. The press called it a graceful pivot. Internally, Elise stepped down as CEO. She came to me afterward, eyes hollow. "I didn't think you'd go this far," she said. "I didn't think you'd push me this far," I replied. Marcus packed his office quietly a week later. On Christmas morning, the house was silent. Lily opened her gifts beside me, laughter soft and real. Elise didn't come. Instead, I received an envelope. Inside was a resignation letter from Marcus, and a handwritten note from Elise. "I forgot who built the ground I was standing on. I'm sorry." I folded the note, placed it in my drawer, and looked out at the snow. This wasn't the end. It was the point of no return. And for the first time, I didn't feel afraid of what came next. The first lawsuit arrived 3 days after Christmas, tucked inside a pale blue envelope that looked almost polite. Marcus had filed it. Not against the company. Against me. The accusation was elegant in its cruelty. Abuse of influence. Emotional coercion. Manipulation of familial authority to regain corporate control. In other words, I was no longer a founder defending her work. I was an unstable mother who couldn't let go. Ruth read the filing without expression. Then she set it down and folded her hands. "He's aiming for sympathy," she said, "not truth." I nodded. I had raised a daughter. I knew the power of tears in the wrong room. "He wants this public," I said. "Yes," Ruth replied, "which means he's underestimating you." The following week, Elise requested mediation. We met in a neutral office downtown, all glass and neutral tones designed to drain emotion from the air. Marcus arrived late, confident, wearing a tailored suit that reminded me uncomfortably of Thomas in his final years. The difference was posture. Thomas stood with humility. Marcus stood with entitlement. Elise wouldn't meet my eyes. The mediator, a man young enough to be my student, once spoke carefully. "We're here to resolve misunderstandings before litigation escalates." Misunderstandings. Marcus leaned forward. "My mother-in-law has difficulty transitioning into retirement. We tried to honor her legacy, but she reacted emotionally." I didn't interrupt. That unsettled him. Ruth slid a folder across the table. "Emails," she said calmly. "Invoices, manufacturing contracts." The mediator's brow furrowed as he read. Marcus's jaw tightened. Then Ruth added something unexpected. "And medical records," she said, "from Mrs. Caldwell's therapist, voluntarily submitted." Elise looked up sharply. I spoke then gently. "I went to therapy after my husband died," I said. "I learned something important. Silence is not peace, it's delay." Marcus scoffed. "This is harassment." "No," Ruth said. "This is evidence." The mediation ended without resolution. That night, Elise came to my house again. She stood in the living room, eyes darting to familiar objects as if grounding herself. "He's scared," she said. "So am I," replied. "But only one of us told the truth." She sat heavily on the couch. "I didn't know about the lawsuit," she said. I believed her. That was the tragedy of Elise. She wasn't cruel, she was weak. And weakness invites stronger hands. The next morning, Ruth called. "Marcus's brother is cooperating," she said. "He's scared of jail." I closed my eyes. The house felt very quiet. The trial date was set for early spring. Winter stretched long and tense like breath held too deep. Caldwell and Price operated in limbo. Orders slowed. Employees whispered. Elise came to the office but stayed behind closed doors, emerging only when necessary. The company I had built on openness now survived on silence. At home, I organized Thomas's old files, sorting memories from documents. Some nights I slept well. Others I woke before dawn, heart-racing mind replaying every choice I'd ever made as a mother. Had I taught Elise to confuse kindness with surrender? Ruth prepared relentlessly. She rehearsed me like a witness, not a victim. They'll try to paint you as controlling, she warned. Let them. Control is different from responsibility. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Marcus sat across from me, flanked by lawyers paid for with money he believed was still his. Elise sat behind him, hands folded, eyes on the floor. When Marcus testified, his voice trembled just enough. She refused to let go, he said. She used guilt. She undermined leadership. When it was my turn, I stood slowly. I didn't refuse to let go, I said. I refused to be erased. There was a murmur. I described the early days, the unpaid nights, the designs sketched beside a crib, the moment Elise called me legacy instead of founder. The judge listened. Then Ruth presented the evidence. The shell company, the loan, the emails. Marcus's face drained of color. The turning point came when Ruth asked Elise to testify. She hesitated, then stood. Her voice shook. I didn't think it mattered, she said. Who owned what? I thought family meant trust. She looked at me then. I forgot that trust goes both ways. The judge recessed early. Outside the courtroom, Marcus confronted Elise. You betrayed me, he hissed. She looked at him, finally clear. No, she said, I stopped lying. When the verdict came weeks later, it was quiet. Marcus's claims were dismissed. The court ruled in my favor regarding ownership and creative rights. But the most devastating blow wasn't legal. It was personal. Elise filed for divorce. On the day Marcus moved out, he didn't look at me. I didn't need him to. The karma wasn't loud. It was precise, and it had only just begun. The silence after the verdict was heavier than the trial itself. For years, noise had filled my life. Phones ringing, meetings, family dinners layered with unspoken resentment. Now there was space, wide echoing space that forced me to listen to myself. Elise stayed in the city apartment for a while, saying the house felt too full of memories. I understood. Places remember even when people try not to. At Caldwell and Price, the board was formally restructured. Not with ceremony, but with caution. I returned as interim chair, not because I wanted power, but because the company needed an adult again. Employees approached me quietly. I didn't know you were the founder, one young designer said, eyes wide with embarrassment. I smiled. Most people don't until something breaks. Production resumed once the fraudulent contract was terminated. Orders returned slowly like trust does, one stitch at a time. Then came the letter, a handwritten envelope, no return address. Inside was a single page. I never meant for it to go this far. I thought if I took enough you'd step aside. I was wrong. Marcus. No apology, no accountability, just fear dressed up as reflection. I burned the letter in the fireplace that night, watched the edges curl and blacken. Some things don't deserve storage. Thanksgiving came again. This time it was just me and Lily. We cooked together. She sprinkled herbs with exaggerated seriousness, her tongue peeking out in concentration. Where's Mom? She asked. Finding her footing, I said. We set the table together. 2 plates, 2 glasses. I sat at the head. It wasn't about dominance. It was about alignment. After dinner, Lily fell asleep on the couch. I covered her with a quilt Thomas's mother had sewn. As I looked at her small, steady breaths, I understood something I hadn't during the fight. Revenge isn't about humiliation. It's about interruption. Stopping a cycle before it teaches the next generation the wrong lesson. That night, Elise called. I'm scared, she said simply. I closed my eyes. So was I replied. But fear doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're awake. There was a long pause. Can I come home? She asked. Yes, I said, but not to hide. Elise returned in early spring, thinner, quieter, carrying fewer certainties. We didn't hug right away. We sat at the kitchen table with coffee between us, steam rising like a fragile truce. I don't know who I am without him, she said. I nodded. Neither did I once. She looked up sharply. You never told me that. I didn't know how I said. Mothers teach strength by example, not confession. Sometimes that's a mistake. She swallowed. I let him speak for me, she said. In meetings, at home. I thought that's what partnership was. Partnership, I said gently, is shared voice, not borrowed volume. At the company, she asked to return in a reduced role. No title, no spotlight. I agreed. Not as a favor, as a chance. The gossip was brutal. Women over 50 are expected to disappear quietly. Daughters who fall from grace are expected to suffer publicly. We ignored both. Then the subpoena arrived. Marcus was being investigated for financial misconduct beyond our case, tax evasion, undisclosed income streams. The shell company was only the beginning. Elise read the notice, hands shaking. "This is because of you, isn't it?" she asked. "No," I said, "it's because of him." The difference mattered. I testified again briefly, this time not as a wronged mother but as a witness to facts. Marcus was charged before summer. The day he was taken into custody, Elise sat in my garden, hands buried in the soil, planting rosemary. "I thought loving someone meant protecting them from consequences," she said. I watched her press the dirt down firm, deliberate. "Sometimes," I said, "love means stepping aside and letting consequence do its work." The company stabilized. A new generation of designers flourished under mentorship instead of fear. I began speaking publicly again. Not about revenge, about boundaries, about legacy that includes dignity. At a conference, a woman approached me, eyes bright. "How did you know when to fight?" she asked. I smiled. "When silence started costing me my name." That night I returned home, poured tea, and sat by the window. The lake shimmered under moonlight. For the first time in years, I felt something unfamiliar. Peace. Not because I had won, but because I had stopped losing myself, and there were still chapters left to write. The first time I said no without explanation, my hands shook. It was a small thing, a request from a vendor asking for an exception. In the past, I would have justified myself, softened the refusal, apologized for boundaries that never needed apology. This time I said, "That won't work for us." And I stopped there. The silence on the other end of the call stretched, uncertain, then polite. "All right," the voice said, "we'll adjust." I set the phone down and laughed quietly at myself. Not out of humor, but disbelief. How many years had I given away power simply by over-explaining my right to have it? At Caldwell and Price, the culture shifted slowly. Not through memos, but through behavior. Meetings ended on time. Credit was given publicly. Younger women stopped lowering their voices when they spoke. Elise noticed it before anyone else. "You're changing the company without saying much," she said one evening as we locked up the office. "That's how real change happens," I replied, quietly until it's normal. She nodded, thoughtful. Then the press called. A national business magazine wanted to run a feature, not on the scandal, on the recovery. They wanted my story. Founder reclaimed legacy after family betrayal. I hesitated. Public narratives have a way of flattening truth into spectacle. But Ruth encouraged me. "Visibility protects you," she said, "and it protects others like you." The interview took place in my living room. The journalist was a woman in her early 40s, sharp but respectful. She asked about betrayal, about motherhood, about aging in an industry obsessed with youth. "What was the hardest part?" she asked. I didn't answer right away. "Realizing that love without boundaries teaches people how to misuse you," I said finally. The article ran a month later, my inbox filled with messages. Women from all over the country. Some widowed, some divorced, some still married but slowly disappearing inside their own lives. I read everyone. One message stayed with me. "I thought I was being kind. I didn't realize I was training them to erase me." I printed that email and tucked it into my notebook. That same week, Elise received an offer. A leadership role at another firm. Smaller, less glamorous, entirely hers. She showed me the email, eyes searching. "What do you think?" she asked. "I think you should decide without asking me," I said gently. She smiled a little sadly. "I accept," she said. The night before she moved out, we sat on the porch wrapped in blankets. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said quietly. "I'm not offering absolution," I replied. "I'm offering honesty." She nodded, accepting the difference. When she left, the house felt lighter. Not emptier, lighter. Marcus's sentencing was scheduled for late autumn. I didn't attend. That surprised people. They expected me to want closure, vindication, a front-row seat to karma. But closure isn't something another person can hand you. It's something you decide to stop chasing. Instead, I spent that day at the company. A new intern asked me where the break room was. She didn't know who I was. She didn't need to. That felt like progress. Caldwell and Price turned a profit that quarter without compromising a single design principle. We declined an acquisition offer that would have erased the brand's identity for short-term gain. The board supported me, not because they feared me, because they trusted me. At home, I repainted the guest room. Soft green, calm, open. I wasn't waiting for anyone to fill it. One afternoon, Lily came to visit. She was taller now, more opinionated. "Mom says you're famous," she said, rolling her eyes. I laughed. "Fame fades." She grew serious. But you don't, she said. Children see things adults miss. On Thanksgiving, I hosted again. This time, the table was long. Friends, colleagues, neighbors, Darla from the conference circuit, Ruth who brought pie and refused to discuss law. We went around the table sharing what we were grateful for. When it was my turn, I said I'm grateful for the moment I stopped mistaking endurance for strength. No one clapped. They didn't need to. After dinner, as I cleared plates, someone tried to help me. I handed them a towel and said thank you. Not because I needed help, because I wanted company. Later that night, alone in the quiet, I opened a new notebook. The first page read, I am not the woman they tried to replace. I am the woman who remembered herself. I closed it and turned off the light. Outside, winter settled in gently. Inside, there was no war left to fight, only life to live. And I was finally doing it on my own terms. The call came on a quiet Monday morning, the kind that used to belong to Thomas. I was trimming rosemary by the kitchen window when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Peace teaches you that not every sound deserves an answer, but something told me to pick up. Mrs. Caldwell, a woman-asked, voice measured professional. This is Judge Eleanor Whitman's clerk. The judge has requested a private meeting with you. I sat down slowly. Judges do not request meetings without reason. The appointment was set for later that week. No explanation, no context. Ruth raised an eyebrow when I told her. That's unusual, she said, but not bad. The courthouse felt different when I entered without fear. Familiar even. Like a place where truth eventually surfaces, whether people want it to or not. Judge Whitman was older than me, silver hair pulled back neatly, eyes sharp but not unkind. I won't keep you long, she said once we were seated. I followed your case closely. I nodded. Women your age, she continued, rarely fight back when betrayal comes from family. They endure. They shrink. You didn't. I waited. There's a judicial review committee forming, she said. Focused on elder financial exploitation within families and businesses. We need lived experience, not theory. I understood then. You want me to testify, I asked. Advise, she corrected. Guide. Speak when necessary. The weight of it settled on me slowly. All those years of silence, of minimizing, of stepping aside. And now the very thing I was taught to hide had become my qualification. I'll do it, I said. Not for revenge, for prevention. The news spread quietly, no headlines, no applause. But my inbox filled again. Mothers, grandmothers, women who had signed things they didn't understand because they trusted the hands holding the pen. I listened. That night Elise called. I heard, she said, about the committee. Yes, I'm proud of you, she said. It wasn't a reconciliation. It was respect, and that mattered more. When I hung up, I looked around my living room. The paintings were back on the walls. The chair by the window held the shape of my afternoons again. I sat down and let myself breathe. For the first time, my story was no longer just mine. It was becoming a warning and a way forward. On the first snowfall of the new year, I stood outside Caldwell and Price and watched the lights come on floor by floor. Designers arriving early, interns laughing, a place alive again. I no longer went in every day. That surprised people. Power, I had learned, isn't presence, it's permanence. The committee work took me across the state. Courtrooms, community centers, quiet rooms where women spoke in lowered voices until they realized they didn't have to. One afternoon, a woman my age grabbed my hand after a session. They said I was lucky to be included, she whispered. I thought that meant I should be grateful. I squeezed her fingers. Included isn't the same as valued, I said, and gratitude should never be demanded. She cried, not loudly, just enough to let go. At home, life became gentle. I cooked when I wanted to, worked in the garden, read novels with endings that didn't punish women for surviving. Lily visited often. She asked questions, smart ones. Why didn't you leave sooner, she asked once. I thought carefully before answering. Because I needed to learn that staying silent doesn't keep peace, I said. It only delays truth. She nodded, absorbing it the way children do when they sense a lesson meant to last. On the anniversary of Thomas's death, I wore my ring again. Not because I needed protection, because I no longer needed armor. That night, I wrote the final page in the notebook that had followed me through betrayal, courtrooms, and rebirth. It read, if you are being erased quietly, you are not imagining it. If love costs you your voice, it is not love. And if you are over 50 and told it's too late to stand up, they are lying. I closed the book and placed it on the shelf beside the others. My life was not a revenge story anymore. It was a reclamation. If you saw yourself in this story, if you've ever been pushed aside, excluded, or told to be grateful for less than you deserve, don't stay silent. Like this story, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe because there are more stories like this one and none of us should have to face them alone.